Coming up on The Returned.
I loved riding my Harley Davidson on the weekends. On this day, there was traffic on the road. I noticed that people were driving on the shoulder of the road to make a right-hand turn up ahead to get out of the traffic. That's exactly what I did. But when I got to the intersection ready to make my right-hand turn, somebody came in the other direction, made a left-hand turn, and ran right into me. I didn't know what happened. The lights went out in my mind. And the next thing I know is that
Hi, and welcome to The Returned. The truth always follows you back. Hi, and welcome to The Returned. Today, we sit with Steven Weber, a near-death experiencer, speaker, and author whose life changed forever after a devastating motorcycle accident left him in a coma. Steven, welcome to The Returned.
Well, MJ, it's such an honor to be here, and I look forward to being able to share my experience with your audience. And I'd also like to thank you. You have a great channel here, and I appreciate everything you do in order to reach out and help people understand that there's more to life than our four walls, and that's a wonderful thing.
Oh, thank you very much. So, Steven, here on The Returned, before I get to the heart of our conversation, I usually like to ground the audience in who you were before. And it doesn't have to be long, just a little bit about who you were before the accident. I also like to know if spirituality or religion played a role in your life or your upbringing.
I would say I was definitely an alt personality. I was what you'd consider an outlaw biker. It's not like I was breaking the law other than traffic laws, but I lived the lifestyle. I spent most of my time on my Harley Davidson driving all around the New York area. And, but I was also a computer guy. I had my own business with my brother and we were consultants. So it was always lots of fun for me because I would drive to my clients' offices on my Harley Davidson with all my tattoos showing. Show you my tattoos with all my tattoos showing. And, it's always a lot of fun. And they gave me a lot of, distance because that, I think I really added a lot of value to their businesses. But I would say on the spirituality scale, I was a 100% zero. I was starting from a dead start. It just wasn't who I was. I was definitely a pleasure maximizing unit, I call it. I loved Harley Davidsons, rock and roll, cold beer, and pretty girls, and that's kind of like my mentality. I'm not proud of it, but I still look back at it a little bit with a smile. But these changes came on, some ways all of a sudden, and other ways very slowly. But I wouldn't want to go back to the way things were before, with the exception of all the grief I brought to my family, going through this experience and this long rehabilitation and the accident and everything I put him through. And in the final analysis, really what I learned is life is good and people are good even when sad things happen. And that's what I like to share with your audience today.
Oh, that sounds lovely. So how would you feel about taking us back to that day?
Yeah, I would love to. Basically, I loved riding my Harley Davidson on the weekends. I would go out to Eastern Long Island. That's the Hamptons, and where all the movie stars go and all the, finance people from Manhattan. But I wouldn't go for that. I would go, there's a little roadside barbecue place that you would drive by and not even make notice of it. You really had to know where it was. So it's about an hour and a half drive from my home on Long Island. I'd go out, I'd have some barbecue, and then I'd ride back. But on this day, there was traffic on the road. It was the springtime and you don't have the summer traffic then. And so it was very out of character. There must have been like road work, emergency road work, or perhaps an accident or something. And so I was sitting on the road for such a long time. It must have been like a half hour. And Harley Davidsons, they are very hot, especially if you're not moving, and very heavy motorcycle. And I noticed that people were driving on the shoulder of the road to make a right-hand turn up ahead to get out of the traffic. So after waiting there a while, that's exactly what I did. Not a bright move, but I did it. And when I got to the intersection, ready to make my right hand turn, somebody came in the other direction, made a left hand turn, and ran right into me. I didn't know what happened. The lights went out in my mind. And next things I know is I'm laying down on the roadway and I'm looking up, and there are emergency workers all around me, flashing red lights, and it also got darker. Some time must have passed, a good amount of time, because I saw it was starting to get around sunset, and all I wanted to do was to get up and get out of there. And as soon as I tried to get up, I felt my bone and my leg it was like my leg was disconnected. The skin was still there, but no, I recognized it right away. I had some sort of compound fracture of my leg, and the pain was excruciating. And I guess I passed out. And the next thing as I know is that I was floating through the air and I was going through the clouds. And I was thinking, what you would be thinking in that situation. But the next thing as I know is I started coming down out of the clouds. And then I looked down beneath me and I saw a big H on the ground with a circle around it. I realized that I was in a helicopter and I was being airlifted to Stony Brook Hospital. I knew that hospital right away. It's a university hospital. I graduated from that university. My mother graduated from that university. My daughter graduated from that university. It's a premier trauma center. And it's just dumb luck that I was an helicopter ride away, that they had a helicopter available, and that they could land the helicopter in a nearby school to basically rescue me. And the last thing as I remember is being brought in on the gurney and looking around and thinking, like, my life is going to be forever changed. Like, this is not something that I'm going to be able to get up and go home from, and I knew it deep in my heart because I was so profoundly injured. In fact, later on, my physician, when he looked at my medical report from the hospital, he said, this looks more like an autopsy report than a medical report, because I had compound fracture in my leg. I had my tibia fractured. I had my arm fractured. Everything on my left-hand side was basically broken. And I had a traumatic brain injury. What was immediate life-threatening is I had internal injuries and internal bleeding. And it took several operations over several days to get a handle on it. But eventually they did. And then for the next just a little bit less than a month, I was in my hospital bed in a coma. And to the rest of the world, I was right there in Stony Brook Hospital. But to myself, in my own mind, in my soul, in my spirit, I was in a completely different place, a place that I've come to call the place between here and there. And what I believe, it's certainly not here, but I don't believe it's the afterlife either, or the continuation of consciousness. It's kind of like a between place, kind of like what perhaps Catholics call purgatory, but it's not a place of punishment. It was a place of understanding and learning. Because like I said, as I was a 0 on a spirituality scale, and what I've come to understand in my own way, that perhaps I was being prepared for what was yet to come in this experience. And at first, I didn't notice that anything was different. It seemed like a very work-like situation. But what I was taught first was how to see and sense spirit in everybody and everything. And what I think was happening is that I was sharing my life experiences with, I would say, the universe, the creation, or some people call the Akashic record. And I was receiving some wisdom to make sense of my life so far and what was next going to happen in this experience. Because what I've learned to believe is that perhaps when you pass into spirit, it's not a light switch. 1 second you're alive, next second you're in spirit. I believe that you have to be prepared to go into spirit, to make sense of your life and to learn those valuable lessons that you've learned from physical life in order to go on to the next step. And so they really had to start from square one. But when I say they, I don't mean I felt like there was a hand guiding anything. I felt that I was presented with situations. I didn't have a choice of these situations, but once I was in them, I had free will to do what I thought was right. And what I learned over a period of time is that at first, time would move very slowly. Like time doesn't work the way it works here. Like you have appointments in the future, the sun rises and sun sets, you can boil water, there's different things that indicate time here. What indicated time there was that you could see how your awareness has grown over a period of time and what things you had to learn and go through in order to get that awareness. And that gave you the sense or even the illusion of time passing. And that was especially critical because so many of these experiences, at first, I didn't get what was going on and time moved so slow. But once I started to understand what was going on and I was learning what I needed to learn, things moved very fast. And so, like I was mentioning, is that I was in this work-like situation and I was dealing with a gentleman who I haven't seen in years, but someone who I knew from work, one of my clients. And one thing is I noticed right away is he hadn't aged a bit since I saw him, and that was like 20 years ago. But I knew him right away. He was like this fella from Haiti, and he spoke English and French and a Creole language. He like made his own language up, and so I couldn't understand him 100%. But he would have mannerisms to act out the words, so we could communicate fine. And he had a lot of he was a funny guy. He was really had a great personality. I really enjoyed his company. So I recognized him right away. And I, said hello to him, and that was what was it. But then I saw him again, and he appeared to be older, like 20 years older. And I recognized him, and it seemed kind of strange. And I said, "Hey, are you so and so?" And he said, "Yeah, you got me." And it was kind of like a game. The game was on. And this fellow was presented to me in every different shape and size a person can be. Sometimes he was a woman. Sometimes he was a man. Sometimes he was a child. Sometimes he was an Asian person. Sometimes he was an African person, all different ages. And I had to guess when it was him. And at first I relied on a mannerism, like he would say a word or something. But after a while, I relied less and less on those mannerisms, and I relied more upon his energy. And what I mean by that is like, even now, when we're walking around in physical life, we'll meet somebody and you'll say to yourself, wow, that person has good energy, or wow, that person has creepy energy. Well, that's the way it felt is I started to become more in tune to his energy than his appearance or his mannerisms. And that's what really began to tip me off to him. So as he tried to trick me with all these different shapes and sizes, I sensed on his energy because those other things could fool me, but his energy could not fool me. That was unique. There was a part of his energy that was unique to him, but there was also a part of his energy that was common to all people. And that's what I began to get in tune to. And it got to the point where I didn't even need to see him. All I could do is he would walk in the area. He would present himself. I wouldn't even see him, but I would know it was him because I could sense and feel his energy. And I think that was the first step in that place that I had to begin to understand is that everything and everybody has this life force energy. And now when I understood this and I looked around at the world and the universe and everything around me, everything took on a whole new meaning because I could sense that life force energy, that part that was unique to every living creature and non-living creature, but that was unique to that. And then all of a sudden, as I look, I began to understand that perhaps we are all connected, that all of us together make up a consciousness. And that consciousness is the consciousness, I believe, of the creator or the creation, that perhaps the creator and we are one, not me as an individual, but all of us together make up the consciousness of the creation. And the way that I would explain this is like, picture the cells in your body. Each cell lives and dies. It has its own life. It needs energy, and it reproduces and such, and it has its own atmosphere around it. But it knows nothing of you, but all of your cells make up you and your consciousness. And that's what I was getting the understanding from once I could sense energy in everything, is that all of us together, just as cells in a body, we all together make up this consciousness of the creation. And that was my first introduction in that place between here and there, is that I went through this learning experience to, to, to sense energy in everything and everybody. And that presented me to my next situation. Like I said, is that I didn't have control over what I was being presented with. But once I learned what I needed to learn from that situation, then I was freed from that situation and put in another situation. And the very next situation I was put in was a life review. And what I've come to learn since then is many people who have these spiritual near-death experiences often have these things, life review, where I reviewed my life over and over again, not just once, but many times, closer to 1,000,000 than it was to one. And if, like I said, at first, I didn't get what's going on. Things moved very slowly in my understanding. I wasn't getting it. But one of the first things I realized is that this skill I had, or this awareness that I had from learning how to sense spirit in everybody and everything. Now, when I reviewed my life, I saw things so differently, because that not only did I understand my energy and what I was going through at the time, but I understood everyone else's energy. And so everyone had their own reasons for being there, their own understandings. And that changed every situation that I experienced. And every time I went through my life experience, my awareness increased. And so, therefore, I could go through my life experience again and learn more from it. As a young child and, in a Catholic church, you were taught that God or Jesus is everywhere and everything. And I really didn't understand what that meant. Like, could God see me, when I went to the bathroom, or like silly stuff that kids would think of. But now I understand it, because that as I did my life review, it wasn't like the ghost of Christmas past and Christmas present, where I walked around and I saw things through one set of eyes. It wasn't like that. It was like I was everything. It's like I was the room, I was the air, I was everything. And so I saw everything. I felt everything from every perspective. It was really the energy of everything that I was reading. And what I also learned is, as I went through each one of my life reviews and I learned from it, and I had this increased awareness of reading energy, I noticed something very valuable. Is I learned that some of the most painful experiences in my life, some of the most heartbreaking things or grief that I experienced in life, was the things that brought me the most bliss in that other place. Because it truly did. It's not that I had a terrible life, but everybody experiences these things in life. It's part of life. It's part of our learning and growing, is the earthly experiences. But as I began to resolve them, I felt such a bliss. It was like, you hear people talk about near-death experience, and perhaps they saw Jesus or Buddha or some deity that brought them peace. Perhaps it was beautiful scenes and, landscapes and flowers. I didn't see any of that. What brought me the most bliss was being liberated from all of these negative experiences in life. Because what I began to learn is that you develop blockages to fully examining your experiences. Like, let's say you did something very harmful to yourself or somebody else. Once you start thinking through it, all of a sudden you feel that shame or that regret, and it becomes overwhelming, and you don't want to think it through anymore, or you think of defense mechanisms to lower that understanding, that grief, or that regret. And because I would go through these things over and over and over again until I got it, I slowly etched away at those things and those blockages. And once I removed one of those blockages and I could really understand what was going on, it was liberating. It was freedom in such a way that a weight was lifted off me. Because if you think about your life and everything that's going on in your life, is that what causes you the most grief? Well, it's the hate or animosity or jealousy you might have towards others, or the shame or regret you have towards yourself. And once you're free from those things, all of a sudden the world looks so different. It is a happy place. And that's what I was discovering as I was removing these blockages. It was true as I was feeling such bliss. And another thing is I learned is that as you go through life, so many times the way you feel about something is occurs at the time it happens. So if you're like a 7-year-old child and a dog bites you, you may be afraid of dogs for the rest of your life if you never think about it again. But if you revisit it, like in your own life review, in the here and now, I don't mean there, I mean here and now, as perhaps a 40-year-old adult with all the experience of a 40-year-old, if you re-examine it, you might determine that you know the difference between an aggressive dog and a happy dog, and you know how to handle each of them. So now you're not afraid of dogs anymore. And that's really what the life review taught me. It taught me how to constantly review where I am in life, in the here and now, and also there. And what that did is in the here and now, if I can't look back 6 months ago and think what a jerk I was, it means I'm not learning and growing. Because it's really the truth. And that's one of the most valuable experiences in that place was learning how to do that life review. And the key component of that is not to hold things to heart, to forgive yourself and to forgive other people, not because you're virtuous, because that's what you have to be able to do in order to remove those blockages, in order to feel that bliss. And that was another valuable lesson that I learned, is the ability to forgive yourself and forgive others, people. Like when I do something wrong, I'm certainly not a psychopath, but I don't feel shame or regret over it. I realize that I've done something wrong and I won't do it again. And I would apologize to someone to make them feel better. But for me, I don't feel like I've learned from it. It's not something, I don't do things terrible intentionally, but it works the other way. When people do things to me as well, is that, violations or transgressions and such, I don't hold it. I don't let people do things, but when it occurs, I understand it and move past it. And that was truly very liberating for me. And another very valuable lesson I learned in that place between here and there. And then once I stopped learning, the very next place I went to, I now believe it was a test. And I believe it was a test to determine, did I learn what I had to learn? And perhaps if I did, perhaps I would stay in spirit and perhaps be a spiritual guide and perhaps be a spirit guide, or perhaps even, I believe perhaps the ultimate destination for our souls, our spirits, is to be at one with the Creator and the creation. So I believe these are all steps. And so I think I was being tested on what I've learned. And if I did not be successful, I would have another opportunity at life, because I was truly dying. In any other world that came before the time, I would have died a long time ago in this accident. But because I had the very best medical care, that I was going to live, and I was going to live and still be able to talk, walk, and do the things you see me doing today. And, but my body and my spirit thought I was dying. And so it was preparing me to pass into spirit. And so this next situation is I was put in charge of these young adults. I call them kids. And I was to show them a task. And no matter what task I showed them, they would appear to listen. They would nod their heads and act like they got it. But then when it was time for them to do it, they would scatter and they wouldn't do it. And I'd see them again and they would act like nothing's wrong. And like, I couldn't believe it. Is that I thought, like, I see you, you see me, we feel our energy. You're supposed to do this. And they just didn't do it. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And finally, when I was at my wit's end, is I stood before the person, I use that term likely, who appeared to be running things. And I wanted to know what was going on. It wasn't that I spoke, it was that I let it be known that I wanted to know this thing. And that's the way things work there. And I realized while I'm standing before this person, I realized I was standing before myself, not Stevie Weber here in a physical incarnation, but perhaps my higher self. And that taught me something very important, is that it taught me that perhaps life is not a one and done deal, is that there's a continuation of consciousness. Some people call it, reincarnation, but I like the term continuation of consciousness, because what I began to understand is perhaps there's always part of you that's in spirit, and just part of you has a physical incarnation, and you have all of your experiences of your past incarnations as intuition. So you once again experience physical life without all that knowledge, but you have the intuition which you can apply to your life and use that to learn and grow, because your higher self they wouldn't make the mistakes that you make. And it's through making those mistakes that I learned in my life review that enables you to learn and grow, and thus your higher self learns and grows. So as I stood before my higher self, I noticed a couple things. First off, is that I'm looking at the whole situation with a new set of eyes. I could see my higher self has this energy around him, like an aura, and I realize I have an aura, and I realize the kids have an aura, but the aura is reflective of your awareness and your understanding, and the energy you feel from that is according to the awareness that spirit holds. And that's one of the first things I understood. And the next thing I understood is, as I stood before my higher self, once again, as I didn't understand what has happened through many incarnations of my higher self, but I understood the wisdom, the knowledge that my higher self knows. And as I stood in that grace, I looked around and I felt like I was receiving that energy, that awareness, a little bit of that awareness that would help me through this situation. And once I received that awareness, I looked around at the kids and I saw that I had totally misjudged the situation. Is that I wasn't there to teach these kids this task. I was there to shepherd these spirits, these evolving spirits, into their first human incarnation. And I was failing miserably at it because I didn't see them. I went through all of this to learn how to sense spirit. I went through my life review to raise my awareness. And now I'm put in this situation, and all I saw was a bunch of dopey kids. I didn't see them as spirits that I had to bring through this incarnation, this human incarnation. And that taught me something very important, because it taught me that perhaps your spirit has not been, when the universe was created this time around, that your spirit wasn't created in the current form, is that it learns and grows through many incarnations, not just human incarnations. And as you go through each one of these incarnations, your awareness grows. And now these spirits before me have yet to have a human incarnation, a human experience, and I had to show them how to do it. And how I did that was exactly the same way as my higher self did to me, is that my awareness, my aura could be sensed by the children, the young adults. And as I stood before them, they had their questions in their mind. And once again, it's not like I answered their questions. It's that they got the benefit of my intuition that enabled them to figure those things out for themselves. It's not like when I learned in that place, it's not like anybody opened up a book, chapter 1, Steve learned, is that I was presented with experiences, and however long it took me, I had all the time in the universe to work through it. However long it took me to learn these things, I learned it on my own. And that's the real key to it, is that anyone could tell you what to do, but unless you understand it on your own, it won't be yours. It won't be your true learning. It'll just be you parroting somebody else. That's why that learning path was so important. So as I stood there before those young adults, they learned from me. And by that knowledge, they were able to successfully have their first human incarnation. And so as I went through this experience, once I came to those realization and my task was done, I was presented with the very next and what eventually was the final experience in that place. And what that experience was is that I live in a small town at the time on Long Island in New York called Kings Park. And there is this cliffs that overlook the Long Island Sound. And at the end of every day, you know, not the whole town, but so many people from the town go down to the bluff and to watch the sunset. People drink coffee and some people drink from red Solo cups that isn't coffee. And you just talk about the town gossip, like who's doing who and those kind of things, and watch the sunset together and just catch up on things. And I found myself sitting with two old friends of mine, Joe and Johnny, and we'd watch the sunset together. And we did this time and time and time again. And I didn't understand what was going on as I was just watching the sunset with my two old friends. They were both in their 70s at the time. And I just didn't understand what was going on. And it was very odd because I knew these guys well. I volunteered at a museum, and they were people who frequented the museum, and the museum did local folklore and stuff. And so they were part of that folklore. And Joey, he was an Irish guy. He talked with an Irish brogue, and he was a raconteur, a teller of tall tales. And I really enjoyed his company. And he actually had down at the bluff as a kid, he dove in and actually broke his spine. He had to have implants put in his spine. He kind of walked around like Frankenstein. He really couldn't move around too much. And then John, he was a diabetic, and he always had problems with infections in his leg. But John, he was great in church. He would do the readings in church, and he had this baritone voice, and he would say, "And Jesus said," and the place would shake. I'm exaggerating a little, but he just had that overpowering voice, and he was a great guy, both of them. And I would watch the sunset with both of them, and over and over again. And then one day I realized, as I sat down, and I use the term day loosely, and the sun set and rose because that was part of the experience. If that wasn't part of the experience, it's not like that was keeping time. It was just, that was part of the experience, watching the sunset. And I realized that both Joe and John had died earlier that year. That Joey got hit by a car. He probably couldn't move around too much, probably didn't see it. And John, he died of sepsis. He got infection in his leg that took him. And that kind of frightened me because even though all these crazy things were happening, I don't know, it just didn't register. I don't know why. I look back at it now, it's like, Steve, but it just didn't register. It wasn't until that moment that I realized that they had both passed and they couldn't be here, that it was just like a shocking moment for me. And all of a sudden, I had to process everything at once. And then it happened again. We watched the sunrise and sunset again. And as I sat there with them, I kept on thinking to myself, I should ask them why they're here. And that just went over and over in my mind, time and time again, sunset after sunset. I wanted to ask them why they were here. And I don't know why I couldn't do it. Maybe I didn't want to know the answer. That was probably it. Or I just don't know. But finally, I got the feeling that if I didn't ask them this time, I would never get a chance to ask them again why they're here. And So once again, as I made it known in my own mind that I wanted to know why they were here, and they told me that they were here to make sure that I was all right. That was so strange to me because I felt fine. I didn't remember the accident. I was going through this experience, most of which was extremely pleasurable, especially the life review when I, was relieved of all of these anxieties. And now I'm being introduced with these new anxieties. Everything up until that point was incredible. Even with the kids, all's well that ends well, it's like that type of thing. And all of a sudden, I'm all right. I feel fine. I just kept on going over that in my mind. And as I'm going over in that, my mind is that I'm watching the sunset, but instead of getting dimmer, the sun got brighter and brighter. And I covered my eyes because it was painful to look at. And then when I opened my eyes, I was in my hospital room and my mother was holding my hand and she was telling me I've been in a terrible accident, but I was going to be okay. And that was just the beginning of the next journey because, it's a lot to take in and it took me a long time to understand that.
Wow. You came back or I should say, you came back with a very different understanding of consciousness and who
Went from
you actually are.
went from outlaw biker Steven to
Yeah.
spiritual Steven. But that process did take a while, but the experience in the place between here and there was the seed, the genesis factor of this longer
Hmm.
experience of realization.
Steve, I was wondering, and I always ask this right off the get-go, is why did this experience happen not to you, but for you?
Well, I think a lot of that was yet to be seen and determined because I thought for the longest time it was just the drugs. I didn't believe that it was a real experience.
Mhm.
That have a six pack to go. It was just I didn't register, and but I felt this energy. I really did, and I wanted to get better. I mean, I really did. I couldn't walk at first; it was just so difficult. But I pushed myself incredibly hard, so hard.
Mhm.
I really did. I just pushed myself. I remember the nurses following me around in the hospital and they would say, you can't do that. We're going to get in trouble. You're going to fall and blah, blah, blah. And I understood that, but I wanted to get better. I was certain if I did these things, I would get better. And it was then I realized what Joey and Johnny meant, that they were there to make sure that I was okay. They didn't mean there. They meant here, that
Mhm.
they were going to be my spirit guides. And now when I think about it, who better to be my spirit guides? Joe, he had a broken back with these implants. My back, I have 2 steel rods in my back and 12 screws. And Johnny, he died of sepsis of the leg. My leg was crushed. And just as I received the wisdom from my higher self, I believe them as my spirit guides, not spirit shields preventing me from feeling pain or anguish, but I received their intuition. I couldn't, because both of them had to go through all this rehabilitation and medical battles all their lives to deal with their disabilities and their ailments. And now I was in the same situation. And it's not like
Mhm.
they said one more push up, go, Steve, you got to do this. But I felt I had the wisdom of their experiences, their intuition, and that enabled me to keep going and to get better. And that was one of the reasons why I think this experience happened to me, because that it was there to teach me and prepare me for different events that were going to come in my life and to help me understand other things that had happened in order to have this transition to face these things and to
Mm,
make sense of them.
great answer. I'm wondering, because prior to that, you were outlaw biker Steve, and you weren't really living a spiritual life. Didn't have a very strong spiritual walk.
Zero.
So, right? So I'm wondering now, after all that's happened to you, do you now maybe see it as some kind of activation?
Very much so.
Mm.
When I was in that place where I was working with the kids, there was a lady there who was praying all the time. Like everyone had a purpose, and I didn't understand what her purpose was there, but she was praying all the time. But I couldn't really hear her words, but I felt this energy from her, this loving energy, this
Mm.
intelligent energy. And it was like the prayer was a road under which this energy traveled.
Mm.
And, and I tell you, when I was really working through things, this energy gave me the energy to put one step in front of the other. It didn't give me the wisdom like my higher self did, but it gave me the wherewithal to make it
Mm.
through these experiences. And it wasn't until I came back to the here and now and I could read energy that I knew who this person was. This was possibly the higher self of a dear friend of mine, Kathy, my friend Kathy. And, and what we were friends. I say just friends, but that doesn't communicate it. What I mean is that we weren't intimately involved, like on a physical level. We just, I walked my dog in this park and I met her many years ago. In fact, biker Steve, she was afraid of, she actually crossed the street. The first time she met me, she was frightened. I would call her Saint Kathy. And, but over the years, we got to know her. I got to know her well. And I would see her several times a week. Not like we planned it. It's just we were walking our dogs in the same park. And so we'd walk for hours together. And, our conversations got pretty deep over time. And so I recognized this energy. And, and
Mhm.
I remember texting her from the hospital and telling her, thank you for visiting me when I was out, if you know what I mean. And, you know, of course she liked that a lot, but it wasn't until later that I learned is that she had all these prayer circles going on for me and she would organize these things and they had these Facebook groups and there were literally thousands of messages from all these people and she was coordinating these efforts and she had actually had a time of every day where everyone got together on a virtual call and prayed for me and and that was the energy that I felt. It truly was is that is that and it was amazing because some of the people who I had FU arguments, at the time I was on the school board. I just had retired from it. So you know how that goes. There was lots of, you know, at any time, half the people in town hated me. The other half wanted me put on a pedestal and that half changed all the time. So to have those people express that love for me and so those are all parts of the understanding that made me think that, yes, there is something else beyond this world. Because how does that happen? It's truly that I felt that energy and it was just wasn't that thing, but it was a series of events that happened that made me understand that perhaps it wasn't the drugs. Not only did I have this real spiritual enlightening experience and it was true and real, but also that there is something else beyond our four walls. And that's why I had to go through all of those processes that perhaps other people who were more spiritual involved could have probably skipped a few steps.
You know what I find very interesting, and I think it was a couple episodes ago, I had when someone was talking about their life review. Um, and this is just a just a piece of what I'm going to say, but it's weird. Who is recording all of these things? You know, when you think about it, and honestly think about it, you had a life review, you've seen all these different things that you actually have done, probably from different ages, I'm assuming, right? It's not all Steve right now, or not all Steve the outlaw biker, but it is, of your life. So who would you say records all this information?
Well, I would say that it's me from my experience. Just
Uh,
as you have your memory, I have
mhm.
my memory. Some things are readily available to you in the consciousness state, but other things aren't available to you in the conscious state, but they're still there in the way that perhaps hypnotism works or other things work. And that, yes, that's the record. But I also believe in that first place where I was seeing and understanding energy, that I believe that I shared my experience with the creation. And that's essential because that's what helps the creator and the creation grow in awareness. That what I believe is perhaps the very reason why we are here. As we learn and grow as individuals, so does the creation learns and grows. The creator, let's say, is perfect, but it doesn't mean that the creator cannot learn through our experiences. And so, in the long answer to your very short question is that I
Okay.
believe everybody has their own experiences, and the universe or the creative consciousness of the universe has the experiences of everyone.
Was there ever a time when you were watching your life review back where you felt like you could have done better? Or, you know, I'm sure everybody's going to have this, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious, was there times like things you see or saw that you didn't like seeing?
Oh, absolutely. And that's
Mhm.
part of the thing that enabled me to get over shame and regret, is having to go through all those things that I regret. But what that also taught me is that if I had to do that over again, I wouldn't make those same mistakes again because now I have a different awareness. And that's what I also learned from my higher self. Why I had to have this incarnation as Stevie Weber now is because my higher self wouldn't make those mistakes. So just, everything is once removed. And that's why I believe it's structured like that. At least that's what I got out of it.
Steve, did you ever see your body?
No,
Like, did you ever see yourself
I don't
in
recall.
this? No?
I don't recall it. Like it was like an awareness. It was just like an awareness everywhere. It's like now we're walking around. Do we see our body? I mean, yeah, if we look in the mirror or something, we look at our hands, but we're really seeing the world through our eyes and we're feeling it through our senses. But there, no, I never looked at myself in the mirror.
Mhm.
I never saw how old I was or even if I was in the form that I am now. It was just my senses were everywhere.
I find it very interesting that you haven't talked about fearing anything while you were over where you were in the in between. Did you have any fear?
All through my life review. I knew every time
Oh.
I went through the cycle of my life review, I knew it was going to be a tough day. And some things, yeah. And some things I didn't want to come to terms with. Like I had myself fooled
Mm,
that it was something else. And I really didn't want to get down to the truth of it because it was
mm.
from a failing of myself and I didn't want to face it. And absolutely every time. But I knew at the end of this, I would feel bliss. So I was willing to overcome those fears because I knew it would be okay. And that's a lot of things towards life as well, is that so many times your fears, your prison bars are of your own construction. And you just have to be able to understand through your awareness to be able to work through them. And that's really what I feared in that place, was reflecting upon myself.
But there was no one there giving you the finger going, you did bad. There was no one judging you, was there?
Absolutely not. And that's really the key, is that, and that's one of the
Hmm.
lessons that I learned, is that there was no judgment, not because of virtue or anything else. It's because it just didn't work with the process. Because in order for
Mm,
you to learn, you had to learn. And that's why time lasted forever, because you could go over this thing a million times until you got it. And there's no waste of energy. Nobody had to teach you or anything. You had all the time in the universe to work through this. And so it's not like someone said, oh, you didn't learn fast enough or you did this terrible thing. You had to figure
mhm.
that out for yourself. And really, as I resolved the blockages, I felt shame until I really understood it, because the shame, as I understood what I did and I felt the true weight of the shame, that was completely unbearable. But once I got past that one step, that's when the bliss would come, because I would have the understanding. You see, that's the way, at least that's what I felt there.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And so it makes me want to ask, obviously, how long do you think you were there?
I would say that I had much more experiences there than I had in this life. And
Wow.
because I had this life over and over there many times, I had all the time in the universe. Time is universal time. It didn't work the way it worked here. And that's the beauty of it. That's why, like, almost when someone shakes their finger at you and tell you you're doing wrong, that's kind of like a shortcut in a way, because you're not given the time to learn it on your own because other people pay for your mistakes. So that's why physical life is different. It could be no other way. But there is different because time doesn't matter. Besides, you want it to move along.
Right? Would you give it a number if you could for the audience?
No, it's not like that. Like I was
Hmm.
explaining in the beginning, is that what made time go was your awareness of your growth, your spiritual growth process, and you saw what it went through. Like, for instance, if I look back at my life review, at first I went through it many times and I didn't learn anything. So now looking at it at the end of all those life reviews, I could see, oh, at first I didn't get it. Oh, here's where I reached this milestone. Then, oh, this experience, I learned so much more from that
So,
experience. And that raised my awareness. All of that repetition gave you the appearance of time. But no, it wasn't like I was there for 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years. I was there like forever. And the way that I would describe that is like infinity. You have no problem thinking of infinity for the future, but can you think of infinity in the past? And that's the way it worked, is that you could keep on taking half of something forever and never be done with it. And that's the way it was like that. The time that passed was forever, just as the time in front of you is forever. And so to say it had a time length, it it really didn't.
Steve, many people spend their lives searching for purpose. After everything that you've actually experienced, do you believe purpose is something we discover or something we create?
Well, I think for the most part, what I said earlier about purpose is that
Mhm.
I believe our purpose is to learn and grow. And so of course you experience it and you learn your purpose. Some people won't learn their purpose in this life or or who knows? But purpose is something that you learn, but it's also innate in the experience of life. The purpose of life is to learn and grow your awareness. As your awareness grows, the consciousness of the creator and the creation grows. And that's what I think is a very reason for having all these experiences. The earth, the people, everything is to grow the consciousness of the creation and the creator. And that is the purpose of life, because as you do this, your bliss and understanding raises. And so that was something that I had to learn. It wasn't something I was gifted with because, like I said, is that I didn't believe any of this stuff. I really didn't.
Mhm.
It took me a long time to really understand it. And it was through this knowledge, this wisdom, these experiences, which I learned from, that enabled me to have this understanding. So to answer your question, I believe it is something that is learned, the purpose in life.
Hmm. So there was one part I loved that said, I stood before my higher self, right? Now, for those in the audience that are listening, what does that exactly entail? Did you see your higher self or did you feel it? Was there a light? What does that mean exactly?
What I felt was the aura. Like, and that's the way I would describe it. It was an energy. And that's what I felt. Just as I was energy, it was the energy. There was a human form there, but it wasn't very clear to me. It was the energy is what took my whole distraction away. That's what I focused on. And it was the intuition, that grace that I received that gave me the understanding to see my higher self in that way.
Mm, very interesting. As you speak about energy and awareness, how has that changed the way you interact with people now during your everyday life?
Well, I would say that it was a process, And
Hmm.
in many ways, if I shortcut it, is that as I'm walking down the street, if I tune into it, and it takes a lot of effort to tune into it, I could feel people's energy. Sometimes I could see who they are. I could feel their spirit. I could even understand things that have happened to them in life. You know, those are the things, but I have to tune into it. Like everything has an energy. People have energy. Groups of people have an energy. Inanimate objects have energy. And it's actually when I walk around, especially in nature, it's almost like a trip. Like you you feel everything. But it takes, you have to tune into it. I could walk down the street and be totally oblivious to everything that goes on and just be tuned into the physical nature of things. And sometimes it's overwhelming. Like sometimes I don't want to put it on this light of a level, but if I'm sitting in a room and I'm bored, I'll start to read people and I'll start to feel their energy just because like I'm not better to do. But sometimes it could take a very difficult turn. So I really don't
Hmm.
do that too much anymore. It was more part of the exploration of it. But these are some of the things that I've carried with me.
Have you found, just in conversation with people, um, about consciousness, spirituality, or near death experiences, do you feel that there is any hesitation when you speak with them?
Yeah,
I'm
if I speak with Steve 15 years ago, there would be lots of hesitation. In fact, if biker Steve met spiritual Steve today, he'd want to beat the crap out of him. you know? Yeah, well, the main point of it is that yes, at first did not want to speak of this at all. I didn't. In fact, I would talk to my friend Kathy and I would crack it up as like a joke, but she wouldn't laugh at me. You know, like other people, family members and such, I didn't share it with too many people because I thought of like these people's like lychee bean eating yogis who really were on a different planet. I really didn't have a lot of respect for it. And that's the way I saw myself. And what really brought me out in this experience was that, there was during my rehabilitation is that, part of that was going to a yoga studio and it's very interesting. And I would do this yoga, and there was a lady there. Her name was Nancy, and she was like 90 years old, and she did the yoga with us, and she was great. She was like a yoga teacher, and she had a wonderful energy. I really enjoyed her. She did yoga when yoga wasn't cool, like back in the 60s. I mean, she really was an incredible person, and all the people from the yoga studio were going to a spiritual yoga festival, and Nancy couldn't go. She was on Social Security, a fixed income. She didn't have any money, but she wanted to go. It was like a crescendo of her life in many ways.
Mhm.
And she really wanted to go. And we felt bad about it. And we wanted to raise money for her, but we just didn't know how. And so my friend Kathy, she said, Steve, why don't you tell your story to everyone in the yoga studio? We could charge $20 a head and we could give all the money to Nancy. And I was very reluctant to do this because I didn't want to be seen in that light, like one of these, crazy people. But Kathy was very persuasive and I loved Nancy. And so I agreed to do it. But what's very interesting about the story is that I wanted to make it interesting. So one of my friends, he played the guitar. He had perfect pitch. He could play anything on one
Ooh.
sitting. And then there was a lady in the studio who sang wonderfully. And so I asked them to be part of it. So what I would do is I would tell part of the story and then I would have them play a song that the whole studio knew so everyone could sing along. Then I'd tell a little bit more just to break it up. And so I thought that was a great idea. And, um, and the gentleman who I had playing the guitar, he was also into hockey and he was a hockey goalie. And I remember him telling me a story about his hockey coach. And there was this lady, her name was Barbara Williams. And I knew that name. Like it was shocking because when he starts telling me her name, I thought to myself, wow, I know her. I used to go and watch hockey games with this lady, and she would tell me all about her life. She would tell me how she was a skating coach and she worked with hockey teams and she taught them how to skate. This was back in the elbows up days, or like, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. She taught the people not only to avoid those things, but how to use those experiences and skate and how to be a better hockey player. And she was kind of famous in a way because she was a lady doing this, a no nonsense, like no nonsense lady. And, and the reason why I was telling Sean this story is because this lady was reaching out to me because that I knew her son had passed and she wanted to talk to me because my
Mhm.
son had passed as well. And
Mhm.
I just wasn't ready to talk with her. And she sent me emails wanting to talk to me. I just wasn't ready for it. And so I didn't respond back to her. So I thought this was a great opportunity to touch base with her. And so I told my friend, I said, invite her to our event. And so he did. And he said she accepted. And so the morning of the event, I got a phone call. And this lady gets on the phone. She says, is this Steven Weber? And I said, yes. Is this Barbara Williams? And she said, yes. How'd you know it was me? I said, come on, Barbara. I know you well. We went to all the hockey games together and you told me all about your life and the hockey and the coaching and everything else. And then I paused for a moment. I thought to myself, I said, but Barbara, one thing I can't figure out, I don't want you to get mad at me, but I don't like hockey. I'm not a hockey fan. And I couldn't imagine under the circumstances under which I would sit there and watch all these hockey games with you. And she told me, Steve, we never watched hockey games together. And I was like, what do you mean? I remember all these things. And she says, no. She says, when you were in the hospital, in the ICU, in your coma, my son was in the very next room to you. And every day I went to visit my son, I would stop by your room and I would hold your hand and I would say the Our Fathers to you and I would tell you all about my life. And I did that every day my son was in the hospital. And I heard all those prayers, even though I wasn't here physically. It was like, in a way, like transcended the physical being because she was part of that energy. And see, so that really taught me a lesson about sharing the story and coming to terms with it because it, everything is we're all part of the same energy. And to keep it to myself in the way that I have probably wasn't the right thing to do. And there is a
Mm.
physical reason for all this stuff. And there's a spiritual reason. And Barbara taught me that physical reason. And I tell you, it really helped me to further understand, that there is more than the four walls that surround us.
Steve, I understand that completely because I had a near-death experience as well that I kept to myself um, for about 7 years for some reason. And well, it was because when I first told someone, they kind of laughed
Yes, yes, I know what
and
you mean.
they made me feel like I was crazy.
Yeah.
And when I was in the hospital and I came out and I said, well, Jesus was just here, they called psychiatrists.
Yeah. I
And
hear
it's
you.
like, it teaches you right then. I shut down. I shut down around that part for a bit and I just kind of was quiet and then just kind of went through my healing and whatever I had to do. It was very odd. So I understand that. Now, having said that, many people watching are quietly carrying grief. They may be struggling or having a difficult season. Um, Based on what you've learned, what do you think you would want them to know?
Well, after having that experience, I had a long rehabilitation and I would go walking with my friend Kathy. And every once in a while, like I had mentioned, is that I would tell her little things about the place between here and there, and she
Yeah.
wouldn't laugh at me. But then what happened one day is I found my dear 20-year-old son. He was dead. He he died of a drug overdose, and it happened so quickly, and I discovered him. And it wasn't like he had this long drawn out experience. He was just a risk taker. He was a fantastic musician. He played the guitar, saxophone, and the piano like awesome. He was a Division I wrestler. He had a scholarship to a premier Division I engineering school. And he got caught up in some crazy stuff at college. And when he came home, what happened happened. And I was really struggling with this. And our trips together, Kathy and I took on a whole new meaning together. It really truly did. And she wouldn't press me on things, but if I talked about it, she would participate. But even now, when I start to mention the place between here and there, she looked like she got angry at me, and I didn't understand it. And finally, she said to me, "Stephen, it's no joke. You think it's a joke, but it's not a joke. You had that experience for a reason, and now your dear son is gone. Why do you think you had that experience? You have to come to terms with these things." And that's the way it started. And then one day my cousin went to a medium, and she wanted her grandmother to come through. But instead of her grandmother, my son came through to her, and the medium told my cousin that my son Nick was sending messages, flowers, roses, and that he had a connection to Saint Teresa, the little flower, and he was sending roses, and he wants to know if we have received those roses. And when Kathy got this message, she was like, aha, aha, I told you so. But I thought it was all BS because they looked on Facebook or something. They found these things out about my son. And she said, no, she had no way of knowing we were cousins or anything. And I just didn't believe it. But, it seemed so strange, but we were seeing roses everywhere on our hike in the middle of winter, on the ground everywhere. And Kathy was saying to me, even before going to the medium, is that she was saying, someone's sending us a message. Someone's sending us a message. Roses shouldn't be here. And I knew what she meant by someone, but I wasn't going for that, because I had my real grief and I didn't want to listen to this silliness. And I said, oh, yeah, it's like Star Trek. And it just used the transporter to transport flowers on the trail here. And she said, no, it doesn't work like that. Is that those flowers are here because somebody else's life was on a different path. And they didn't put them there for us to see. It was for their own things, that they were own experiences that we may not know about. It wasn't they were materialized, but we were on our path. And that's why we saw them. And that's the way signs and synchronicities work. And she made a lot of sense, but I still wasn't buying it. And then what happened is, about a year later, we're walking in the woods, and she had a little statue of Saint Teresa that she brought with her, and she put it at the base of this tree, right next to this stream that would go by in our walks all the time. And then she had a backpack with her that was filled with flat stones and a magic marker. And she wrote on the magic marker a prayer, and she put it down there. And most of the times I let Kathy do the praying for both of us. But this time I went along with it. And, and I wrote a little prayer message to my son, and I put it on the rock there. And we left it there. And then we came back a few weeks later. There was like 100 rocks there. Everyone had prayers. They picked up the pen and, the magic marker, and they wrote all over them. And I'm looking at all these things, and I'm thinking to myself, some people might think, oh, everyone has problems. Nobody cares. But I thought the exact opposite. I remembered that energy from the place between here and there. And I realized that no, we're all in this life together. We're all experiences these crazy things. Although my pain is unique to me, everybody experiences these things. And we have to help each other, and we have to grow together and be there and support each other. And it's kind of like that Sting song, Message in a Bottle, where he puts a message in a bottle, and instead of getting an answer back, he gets 10,000 bottles back. And that really began to bring me peace, because all of a sudden I started to feel that energy, the same energy that I felt in the place between here and there with everyone praying for me. I was receiving that energy from from those rocks, those silly rocks with those prayers
Mm.
on them. And then Kathy brought with her a mass card from St. Teresa, and she gave it to me. And she was grinning the whole time. I didn't know what was up, but I look at the card and it said St. Teresa's birthday. That was my son's birthday. And then it had the day that St. Teresa was canonized. That's the day that a person is elevated by the church to be a saint. That was the same day my son died. Like, how does that happen? Like, are there really coincidences? You know, really, how does that happen? And that was like almost like that moment when I was with Joey and John in the place between here and there. It's like all of a sudden I have that looking at me, and it's like, how do I dismiss this? The medium said Nick had a synchronicity with Saint Teresa, and he was sending the flowers. And now I see this. And it just took me a while to come to terms with that. And then that evening, I had a dream that my son came to me in a dream and everything was all right. Like, it was almost like none of this happened. And I saw him in like this beautiful, he looked great, you know, in a way like I didn't even remember him. Like, he looked so happy and so bright and everything. And when I woke up and I realized, no, all these things did happen, but I felt it wasn't like all the grief was gone, but so much of it was gone because I had this understanding, not only through all my experiences in the place between here and there, but also the way he appeared to me in that dream. He almost appeared to me like the way I was looking at my higher self. And I knew he was happy and going through the same experiences. Well, he was learning the same things that I had to learn, but only in a different way, a way that would make sense to him. Because when you learn things, what I believe is like they're unique to you, but the lessons you learn are probably the same. Like someone in Tanzania or Timbuktu, they wouldn't respond to the things that I saw. They would have to learn it in their own way. And I could see that my son was learning those things in his own way. And that's what really made the difference for me, is that what Kathy said was true, is that I really had to understand this experience and then use what I learned to understand what had happened with losing my son and the aftermath and the effect that it had on my life. And once I came to those realizations, life was different again. I didn't feel guilty when I laughed. You know, after I lost my son, anytime I was happy or I laughed, I felt like, wow, this feels unreal. And all of a sudden I could put his pictures back up in the house. Like, I had to take all of his pictures down. I had to take all of his pictures down. Excuse me. But now I could put them back up again. And yes, it did help me with grief. And, you know, and that's what I'd like to share.
I hear you, and I want to say first and foremost, my apologies for your loss. Um, it almost seems so strange to hear, you know, a parent losing or your child going before you do. And that's one of my greatest fears, to be honest. And I don't
Every
like to
parent.
fear, but yeah, I have two sons in their 30s, and I worry so very much about them. That would just be, I know I could get through it like we all have to,
Wow.
but I don't want to feel that anytime soon.
That's so true, because that's the club that no parent wants to belong to throughout all of history. That's the worst thing. That's the greatest fear. And I saw it in my friend's face, because as I started to see my friends and everybody after having that experience and losing my son, is that I could see their grief in their eyes and their face. It was so real because they knew my son, especially people on the wrestling team or the football team or the bands and things. We spent so much time together. They knew him, and I could see their grief was real, but I also saw something else in their eyes. And it's true. For the grace of God, it wasn't me. And that's really true, because that is a parent's greatest fear. And I tried so hard to make them feel at ease. I felt that that was a burden on me. I wanted them to know that without saying it, that those feelings were all right. And
Mhm.
so that's what I wanted to share.
Oh, the space you talk about, the in between. Now, you were in a coma, right? And bear with me while I'm thinking. Sometimes you can really see me thinking. But I'd like to know where that space is. So, or where, like where you think that is. So, is this consciousness? Is this a place you went? What would you say to that?
Okay. So very good question. What I would say is that it's kind of like it's an energy. And
Mm.
that's a very broad term, but it's like, what is the afterlife? What is your consciousness? What is your awareness of yourself? Like, where does that come from? Is that all just physical? Is that just all your cells together? Like I'd explained before, that creates you, but you
Mhm.
have your own consciousness. Is that consciousness separate from your physical body? And I say, I believe it is. And I believe there's another plane of existence, another plane of understanding where spirit lives and grows. Lives is a very, I just use that term, but that's what I believe it is. There's a
Mhm.
complete another realm of spirit that doesn't have physical form. It just has awareness and consciousness. It's very difficult for us to understand it, many people in general, but that's what I believe it is. It is a plane above where we are, what we experience. It's all energy and consciousness. Each consciousness is separate, has its own separate, but there's a collective consciousness. And that's what I believe.
That sounds good. I always ask that because, our bodies are lying in the bed, right? But we're experiencing this elsewhere. We didn't go anywhere. We're still all right there. So I always like to ask that, and I love to hear what people say to it. But if I was to ask you if you fear death, what would you say?
Well, I would say not in the way that fear is not the right word. I mean, before this experience, 100%. But
Hmm.
what I want to do is that because my life experience was so rewarding to me, is that I want to get as many experiences here in the physical world. It's the only thing you take with you. And so I do, I want to get, and that's kind of like the will for life that people intuitively know, but without knowing why, is that I want to get as many experiences. I want to laugh. I want to cry. I want to have success. I want to have failure. I want to have all these things, especially as I get older and I have this wisdom that's accumulated from my physical existence and also from the place between here and there that I want to experience more. So absolutely, I don't want to die. I want to
Hmm.
live and experience things, but I don't walk around, like connected to my physical mortality because I know there's something else and it's great. It's really great. And that perhaps I will return to my higher self. And so, no, I don't fear death in that way, but I definitely want to continue to experience life in every way I can for as long as I can.
Beautifully said. Steve, for those who want to learn more about you, your work, your services, and your published works, where can they find and where can they connect with you?
Well, I have a website. It's uh, betweenhereandthere.org, not com, betweenhereandthere.org. And that's like the gateway to the Facebook and YouTube and those types of social media. But also one of the best ways to connect to me also, in addition to that, is to comment on this video because I read all the comments and I respond, especially if you have a question. I respond to everything I can. I rarely miss something, especially like I can't give you advice, but I could share with you what those things mean to me and you can make sense of it for yourself. So commenting here is really a great way as far as if you have any questions, or you'd like to share your experiences with me because I learn from these things too. And then also I've written 2 books. Here's the shameless promotional plug. these these are my two books, and one is called The Place Between Here and There, where I discuss the experience in that place. And we only had so much time today, but there's so much more to the story and so many things I've learned, especially about forgiveness in this world and any other
Yes.
world that comes afterwards. And I think that's important because the ability to forgive yourself and others, excuse me, is so freeing of your spirit. And it makes sense in this world and any world that comes after. Excuse me. And the second book is called Lessons Learned Between Here and There. And what those are is what I lay out as 12 lessons that I learned from that place between here and there that really gave me an understanding that I can apply in my regular life. And I go into detail about what those lessons are. And they're things like, your spirit, part of you always exists in spirit. You could connect with those in spirit. That perhaps love is the ultimate intelligence, that there is no
Mhm.
one central religion, perhaps many paths, one destination, perhaps not all paths, but many paths. That, those are some of the lessons that I've learned, and I go into detail about those in the book. And then finally, I'm working on a new book, which I call Mantras, Meditations, and Good Vibrations Between Here and There. And what that does is that it applies using guided meditation the lessons that I learned in that place between here and there. It's an overview of what meditation is, what mantras is. But really, I go through each one of the chapters where I've created a guided meditation to each one, and it helps you better understand it and apply it towards your life. And so those are my three books. The latest one should be out in a month or so, and they're available on Amazon. But if you go to the web page, that has all that information on there, and that's about it. Oh, and I also lead a weekly group. It's not online. It's just a local group, but I love it. It's called actually Mantras, Meditations, and Good Vibrations. I named the book after that. And it's a wonderful gathering here where I live. I get the room for free, so I don't charge anything. It's once a week. And I have this big 6-foot gong that I roll out my front door because the venue's only like 200 yards from my house. And so I push this big, huge gong out the door, and I have these wonderful Tibetan brass bowls that I play. I have a flute. Sometimes I play the guitar. I have an instrument called a harmonium. Harmonium. It's like a keyboard that I kind of like. It looks kind of like a organ kind of thing. And about 100 people, between 50 and 100 people show up each time. And we sing along to Sikh and Hindu and Christian mantras. And we do some hand movements to the mantras. And then I do a sound bath for everyone for about an hour's long. And I love that. I really do enjoy that. I live in a great community, and it's,
Mhm.
I live for that. And so, and it's a selfish pleasure because everyone else, they really get a lot out of it, and it really helps elevate their spirit,
Mhm.
especially as people have anxiety and stuff. It kind of frees people from that. When I say it's a guilty pleasure, because I get so much pleasure out of it, it really is a lot of fun. And it's cool because like also when I play the gong, I have mallets that I go like this with, but I also have the friction mallet that I rub on the gong, and it makes this really cool sound. And what I do is I spell out Reiki symbols and other spiritual symbols on the gong. So what I do is I use that awareness from the place between here and there to read the energy of the group, not of the individuals, of the group. And I try to fine tune the gong meditation using those Reiki symbols and my friction mallet to address that energy in the room. So that's basically what I'm up to.
Wow. Wow, that sounds absolutely beautiful, to be honest with you. Um, what a great way to spend one day a week.
Um, I would like to, do we have 5 minutes? I'd like to tell a very important story that I'd like to share
Sure,
with
please do.
people. And it's about what I was talking about before a little bit about coincidences and signs and synchronicities. And,
Mhm.
um, and that's another thing that really brought me to that place between here and there is that, is that I'm starting to think that there really isn't too many coincidences in life.
Mhm.
And and that the signs that you receive from those in spirit are very important. They're like guideposts along the path of life. They're not spirit shields to prevent you from experiencing pain, but they perhaps help you at critical times to understand it and get over it. And a lot of times, like if someone sees a sign, like maybe a hummingbird, and they think, "Oh, that's a sign from so and so," and they get all excited about it, and that's important, and I understand that. But what I have learned, if you try to understand the meaning behind why you are seeing this sign, whether it's an object or a situation that you can learn from it. And once you open up your mind and your heart to seeing signs and synchronicities, that you'll receive more of them because perhaps spirit knows that they could communicate with you. And I'll give you a perfect example, which helped me to understand this, is that during this health crisis that we're all facing as a world a few years ago, my friend Kathy and I, we would walk along the beach. And it was one of the only places you can go where you're allowed to go. And Kathy would pray for the earth, to get through this health crisis. So I often think to myself, if it wasn't for Kathy, things would have been a lot worse. But she prays to this Saint Germain, known as the Violet Flame. And she wanted a sign from Saint Germain that Saint Germain heard her. And so she asked to find violet beach glass. Beach glass is that glass that rolls around in the surf. You pick it up and you look at it. It has all shapes and patinas to it. And the chances you'll find violet beach glass on the shore of Long Island is zero. You will find hen's teeth before that. I mean, really, you'll find a diamond ring in the bottom of a Cracker Jacks box before you find that. And so I knew she was going to be disappointed. There's plenty of brown bottles and green bottles from all the beer. And there's plenty of maybe not so plentiful, but you'd get like cobalt blue bottles because like Noxema containers and other things. But no violet beach glass. So we're walking back from one of our hikes and Kathy is, she's got a pouty face on. So I'm trying to think of something inspirational to tell her that Saint Germain has heard her prayers. Because I know really, Kathy's really good at praying. I learned that from the place between here and there. And so I know Saint Germain heard her prayers, but I'm just trying to think of something to say. And just then this Dalmatian puppy, it's a dog, a white dog with black spots on it, comes running from behind the sand dunes, starts jumping all over me. And yeah, I love dogs. I'm pulling on its tail and yanking on its ear and, doing the puppy thing. And I'm really enjoying the puppy. And then the parent comes running from behind wherever they were. And they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And I'm like, "Don't worry about it. We love doggies. Kathy loves dogs. Well, I've always had dogs, And she said she was sorry. And we were chatting with her, chatty catty, she loves to talk. And we're just talking to the lady. So finally I asked the lady, "What's the dog's name?" Violet. The dog's name is Violet. The white dog with the black spots on it is named Violet. And I'm like in shock, and Kathy doesn't come up for air. She just keeps on talking. So we start to leave, and Kathy has her pouty face on. I'm like, "Kathy, the dog's name is Violet. You want a sign? That's your sign." And she was still a little upset. I think she just wanted to find the violet beach glass. But I was like, "No, Kathy, we have to see that lady again. This is a sign. We have to figure out why we are seeing that message." And so, we went there every day. A few weeks later, we see the lady and the puppy again. And so I go running up to her, me and Kathy, and I ask her, "How does this Dalmatian puppy get called Violet?" And she told me her favorite movie is Gone with the Wind, and she used to watch it with her kids. And Scarlett O'Hara, at one point, I think Brett Butler gave her a violet dress, which she wore, but she looked very pretty in it. And she thought that would be a good thing to name the dog Violet. And then she told me her son had died earlier that year. And so she got the dog to help her with her grief. And she remembered all those times that her and the kids would watch Gone with the Wind. And so she thought that would be a nice way of remembering her son. And so she named the dog Violet, but she spelled it not like the color, but the way the name Scarlet is spelled. I think it has two T's in it or something like that. And I got to talking to her about her son and my son. And this happened over several days and really helped me even come to terms to things. I never met somebody who had a similar experience at that time. And so fresh, both of our experiences were fresh. And it was so important that we had that meeting. And how does that happen? How does that a
There are no
dog named,
such thing as coincidences.
yes, a dog named Violet brought us together, but it's also taught me something else is that I believe our sons brought us together through a dog named Violet because they felt our pain and our anguish. And they knew if they put us on this path together, it wouldn't shield us, but it would help us to understand. So if I was to leave your audience with this one important message is that look for signs and synchronicities in your life, especially if you're overcoming from grief, is that I believe very strongly that those in spirits do communicate to you and they will send you messages that will help you more than just, hey, I'm here, but to actually help you through those rough spots. Just open up your heart and open up your mind. And I think you'll receive those messages. And once they could communicate to you, they'll send you more messages. And it all comes down to this final thing that life is good and people are good, even when sad things happen. And these are just words. But if you can make them your own through your own understanding, through your own experience, you will find peace in this world and any other world that comes after. That's what I believe.
Wonderful. Steve, on this podcast, I believe that everyone that returns with a truth. What truth did you return with that you would want humanity to know right now?
Love is the ultimate intelligence in life. And I don't use that word intelligence just to say it. The warm and fuzzies is just the gateway. But once you understand the energy and the intelligence in love, true love, that you will understand really that purpose in life that we talked about, that love is empowering, but that empowerment can enable people to do very negative things. That's why love has to be wise and has to be wisdom and has to be that ultimate intelligence, because that love is what helps you through everything. Love, true love is the ultimate intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. Steve, I can't thank you enough for sharing such a deeply personal and profound part of your journey. Your willingness to speak openly about life consciousness and what you experience reminds us that life's greatest transformations begin in the darkest moments. So thank you for bringing your light, your love, your truth to the returned today.
Satnam, thank you very much.
You're welcome. To everyone watching and listening, or watching or listening, perhaps today's conversation is an invitation to live more intentionally, to remember that every moment has value and every challenge shapes us. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay open, stay curious, and keep returning to the truth within you.